Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Veil. Today, Katherine Masel shares her near-death experience from childhood when she was hit by a car and found herself floating above her body, observing the scene with heightened awareness. This profound event taught her the importance of being present and positive.
My name is Katherine, and when I was 6 years old, I was living in New Orleans, and back then they had a hurricane that went through, and it wasn't like a Katrina, it was just kind of a storm, and because of the hurricane during the weekend, that Monday school was canceled. I was the youngest of 8 children. I had 6 older brothers, and it was a big deal to have school canceled. A brother and I jumped on a bicycle and went to go do like we typically did. It was just after summer, and we were feeling like it was an extended summer. And we went to a convenience store, bought some candy like kids do. And when we were leaving, I was on the handlebars. My brother was driving the bike. I don't remember the moment of impact, but we were hit, both of us, by a car that was doing 60 miles an hour. I don't remember any pain, but I do remember seeing myself as if I were floating above my body about maybe the height of telephone poles or so, looking down. And I looked down and I saw this little blonde-haired, mangled little girl with blood around her head and someone kneeling over her. And I realized that that was me. And the awareness that I had from that perspective was very different than that little girl. I was like, that's who I was at that moment. But the place that I was viewing from was oddly familiar. It was almost like a place that I'd been before, and I feel like I would be going back to again. And I'm looking at this little girl, and I was wondering, who is this person kneeling over me? So as I thought that, I felt that person's emotions. It was a young man, guessing in his early 20s. This was back in the 70s. He had kind of curly hair and a mustache, and I could feel that he was worried about me. This is probably the most distraughtful thing that he's ever seen. He was wondering if he should blow in my mouth, and I knew he wasn't CPR trained because I could feel what he was thinking. He was wondering, is this child going to die in front of me? He's trying to comfort me. And what he didn't know, from that perspective, I was in no pain whatsoever. And just at that moment when I thought, what happened to me, it was almost like a camera panning, but I panned over to a vehicle. It was a big, like 1970 something car, and a young girl had really long hair, was over the hood, just devastated, crying. She was not supposed to take the car out that day, and I don't know the exact details. I don't know if she'd taken the car out or if it was just the fact that she was speeding, doing 65 or 60 miles an hour. I was told, during or in a lower speed zone. But she was very upset that, one, she had just hit 2 people and that she was going to be in a lot of trouble. So I was thinking, and I understood that me, that child, had just gotten hit by a car. And I thought, okay, wow, that's pretty interesting. As I mentioned, I was the youngest of 8 children. Like, where's my family? And my sister, who I was very close to. There were 6 boys. And my sister was like, my older sister. She was my hero. And as I thought that, with this awareness, kind of panned me over to a group of people, and my sister was there. I didn't realize this at the time, but lying there, my lips were moving. I was speaking, even though I don't remember that. I didn't feel any pain, but I was calling from my sister. And the people in the group that were with her said, go to her. She's calling for you. And my sister was crying. She was 14, pretty young child, and she couldn't go to me. And as I was observing her, I felt all of her emotions. She couldn't go to me because this was the moment in her life that she feared the most. She was a very responsible 14-year-old. She was my mother's helper who always took care of all of these other kids, these boys. She was the babysitter, the dishwasher. My brothers were kind of bad. They were, Southern boys who just, had fun. They rode motorcycles. They liked to catch snakes. They were in trouble in school often, just, not out of range, but just they were different than my sister was. She was a rule follower, and she was always afraid that one of my brothers was going to die or do something stupid. And now she was at that moment that she feared the most, but it wasn't her brothers. It was her little sister who she, was so delighted to finally have a little sister, but she couldn't go to me because it was just too scary. After getting that realization and feeling how my sister felt, I didn't know this, but my sister as a 14-year-old, had a lot of resentment toward me because I was the youngest. I didn't have the responsibilities she had. I didn't have to do, a lot of dishwashing and cleaning up and taking care. I was the baby of the family. And there's no way I could have known that because she never told me that. But I felt all of that disdain in her and all of the way that she felt. And that was kind of interesting to me to see that had taken on a role that was given to her, to help my mom. She took it very seriously and she was overwhelmed. Went back to seeing myself on the ground. And as I'm seeing these different things, I suddenly had the awareness of an entity, we'll call it a person or just a being, that was behind me. I was looking down over the situation, and it was almost as if there was light emanating from behind me that was almost like bubble rainbow kind of light. It was beautiful. And it was so softly radiant that the scene that I was looking at almost looked black and white. And the way I was seeing the scene, seeing my sister, seeing that gentleman, seeing the girl, was, you could almost see the texture in the clothes. It was very, very detailed. I was very, very aware. It was very interesting to know that the entity behind me somehow was gentle, and I was very aware of their presence. I had the opportunity, and it wasn't with a question. They prompted me to decide whether I wanted to go back to that little girl's body or go with them. With them was a place that I'd absolutely been before. It was a place I was familiar with. I'd been before. I believe that I will go again. And it was going back to this body was almost like going back to like seeing a movie. You ever, live your life. You go to a movie and you kind of see what's going on and then you go back home. That life for me as a little girl was like just going to a movie. And it was kind of like something that I may have orchestrated or created, or it was literally my life. So didn't really make any decisions. I was just kind of watching things as they happened. And the next thing was, I thought about my mom, because my mom and my sister were like very important entities in my life at that time. And I don't know how I got from the ground to the next scene that I was panned to see, but I was in an ambulance. My brother was getting put in another ambulance. He was mangled. He had after the accident, he had a body cast on for a long time. And he had multiple surgeries. He was at a critical life or death situation. I saw him. But as my mother, in the ambulance where me and my mother were, my lips were blue and my lips were moving, and I could hear her pleading with the ambulance staff. Back then in the 70s, they didn't have oxygen in ambulance, if you can believe that. They were privately owned, and she was begging them to put oxygen on me, and they didn't tell her they didn't have it. They just didn't know what to say, and she was literally just like pleading for my life, and this was a big deal for her. My mom was a very hard worker. She had 8 kids in 11 years, and this was her baby, who I could feel the emotion of what that would have meant to her if I would have passed away at that time. And it was a lot. And she was obviously very upset. And it was odd because I didn't hear her say what I just mentioned. I could just feel how she felt at that moment. And this would have been a devastating thing for her. And then I saw things about my mom that I could never have known as a 6-year-old child. My mother was a senior in high school, a Catholic school, and she had gotten pregnant. It was kind of a shameful thing. With my oldest brother, she was not welcomed with open hands. She was not welcomed with open arms into my father's family because he was supposed to go to college and he was the golden boy. He was the only son, and he gave all of that up so that he could raise a family. I don't think they knew at that time they would be having 8 children in 11 years, but I saw things. I felt how that felt to her. As a child, I felt things from her family that were not okay. She was given up to her aunt because there were things in her family that I don't want to get into, but they were not appropriate for a young girl. And I could have never known that. And then after feeling and seeing things about my mom, I just saw this vision. So behind me was this entity, and then it was in front of me now, almost like a field that had lots of flowers. It was vines, and some of the flowers were weedy, and some of them were like rose bushes, things that you typically wouldn't see together. And then one of the flowers was just a white, pristine flower that had this beautiful glow. And the entity behind me was let me know that that's kind of how my mom was. She was overlooked in her life. She didn't get a lot of the chances that maybe she should have gotten. She didn't get a fair shake in life. And this flower was a representation of my mother. So after seeing that and then having a choice to go back to my mother or my family or going home essentially behind me, there was no way I couldn't not go back to my mom. I loved her so much. I loved my sister. And I loved the life that I knew that far in my life. So I made the decision to go back. But before I did, I was fascinated and just delighted, almost like a child with a new toy, about how I could see my mother, see my sister, see situations, and automatically be directed there. This was fun. It was almost like having a vehicle that you could go into, feel, and the entity explained to me. And again, it's not in words, and it's almost embarrassing. It's hard to explain how, but it's just something you don't speak, but you just, it's a kind of a telepathic thing. I don't know. It sounds strange in words, but he portrayed to me that what you think and what you focus on and like wonder about, that's kind of where your life is directed to. And he showed me that what you think about, you have to be very careful, because even in your life, going back, which I knew at that point I was going to go back, going back, don't be, what I got from it is don't think about just frivolous things. Don't think about if you're watching something on television that's bad, that affects how you are and how your life may be. Focus on things that reflect how you would like your life to be, as if we almost have control of how our life can be. The next thing I knew, I woke up back in that child's body, laying on my back, looking up at the ceiling. I didn't know where I was. I was in a small room. It was like a waiting room, I suppose, in a hospital. And it was like typical commercial style ceiling with like tiles, and it had crossbars. And looking up, the crossbars were like a shiny beige, and the ceiling had beige tiles. And it was just so beautiful. It was almost like the texture I saw, and I was when I was where I was before I went back to that situation. And looking around, the sheet over me was just so beautiful. I could see the wrinkles and the shadows, and it was just an intense awareness. I wasn't thinking about, where I was the day before or where I was going to be. I was completely aware, and it was, and not filtered by who I thought I was or what I had to do. It was just an intense moment of just presence and joy. I came out of that experience with just a gash on my forehead and no other major injuries. I remember seeing blood around my head, and it was probably from my forehead, and just kind of being a mangled child. My brother almost died. As I mentioned, he was in a body cast. So somehow I was just not injured. I was in the hospital for about a week. My brother was there for 6 weeks, intensive care and such. And then after that, I never told my parents or my sister or anything about that situation, because that child, as a 6-year-old child, I still believed in Santa Claus. I still believed in the Easter Bunny. I still believed in fantasy. So I didn't realize that potentially something miraculous actually happened to me. It wasn't until years later, I was, I don't know, 13 or 14 years old, just hitting puberty kind of. And I was out with my sister, and she was telling somebody about the accident, because I have a scar on my forehead, and she was telling what that scar was on my forehead, and then prompted her to talk about the accident. And she said, yeah, my sister was calling me, and I felt so bad, and I still feel guilty to this day, and I should have gone. So later I said to her, I saw you. And she said, what? I said, yeah, I saw you. And I told her what she was thinking and all, and she was shocked. There were things I told her about the situation, about the guy who was kneeling over me, and she was relieved to know that I didn't feel like she had, betrayed me somehow by not going. So later I asked my mother about the situation, and I told her that I saw her, and I explained to her things that I had seen. And I opened, as a young teenager, I felt old enough to talk to her about the things that I had seen with her family. And my mother confided in me that yes, that was true. And she wanted to know who told me that, like what family member or how because those were things that she had never told anyone. So that was kind of interesting. But what I've taken away from that experience is I try to now, especially, and when I was younger, but throughout my life, to be present. And you hear about the power of being present, but it was really, for me, powerful. And to guard your thoughts. Like if people are talking bad about someone, I just choose to focus my attention on something else. I tried that. If there's something on the television that's maybe murder shows or things that are not healthy for who I want to be and where I want to go in my life, I turn them off. I believe the energy from that kind of seeps in the walls, and it's something that becomes a part of who you are. So, it's difficult because we're human, but I try to speak positive words. I try to think positive things when I find myself getting down or depressed because, we're human. I just release it with love and try to be more positive and focus on just the miracle of being alive right now, not because I was hit by a car, but just, breathing in oxygen right now. My vision to see, I believe our bodies are miraculous just in the fact that I'm just sitting here right now. So I try to focus on the good, and people watching this, they don't know me, but I have had a really, really good life. I am so blessed, more so than I would say most of my family. But I feel if you focus on something and you feel it and want something, that you can manifest things and bring things to you. And it's only because I understand what I felt in that experience.
Thanks for watching today's video. If you want to learn how to create a profitable YouTube channel like this one, click the link in the description and let us show you how. See you on the next one.